Hey everybody, it's Chris with Lazy Trucker Disc Reviews, and today we are going to be taking a full look at the Supreme Escape. This is the first run. Now if you're thinking, Chris, you already talked about the Proto Supreme Escape, you're right, I did. I did a full review on it, and I found that it was an amazing disc for hyzer flips and distance. It had great glide. It's the Supreme plastic, which is very similar, or it's the same as Latitude's Grand plastic, so that amazing smoother than Fusion but still grippy plastic, that durability and that beautiful finishing where very little flashing exists on any of these discs. So you get all of that in the Supreme line. This is Dynamics version of the Royal line from Latitude. So if you've thrown any of those, you know how great they feel. If you haven't thrown any of those, shoot me up and I'll send you messages on just how grippy it is, how nice it feels, how good it looks, all that stuff. Anyway, let's move on. Because when I did the Supreme Escape, what I noticed was it was a disc that would flip up, turn out, and maybe finish a little bit, but was more of a drift. Very akin to a current. The main tool I used was the KP Orbit Escape, or a Fusion Escape. Very similar to those current runs, just maybe a touch more stable than the current Lucid, but in that realm. It was a disc that I talked about could be broken into a roller, or would be a great turnover disc, and I had talked about using it that way. I did give it to a friend, which I'm kicking myself for, not because I gave it away, but because I would have liked to show the difference between that and the first run. So when I got the first run in my hand, two things I noticed right away. With the Proto, I talked about how it was a little bit more flat-topped than a regular Escape. The first run, immediately when I grabbed it, I realized that wasn't the same. It does have a more of a domey surface, like your standard Escapes, your current run Escape, your regular Escape, sorry, as opposed to the Supreme Escape. So it had that little bit of domier. And then if you watch, sorry, my camera's tilting as I go because my tripod's messed up, sorry. But if you watch that review, and if you watch my Lazy Trucker review, which was kind of a joke, you watch me throw it into a headwind and it got pushed way out, but it faded at the end. And I immediately wondered, after I saw that, hey, does that mean this actually has that finishing stability? And that's why I wanted to test it. My objective was to review this disc, or to take it out and test it, and film it just in case there was a big difference. And as you can see, because I'm doing this right now, there was a difference. What I found was this disc might flip out, but it wanted to fade at the end. So you will see it. You will see it compared to a current run of Lucid, but you're going to see the stabilities just aren't the same. And then you're going to see me compare it to the KP Orbit, but you're going to see again, stabilities aren't quite the same. What you're going to see me compare it to the most is this first run Lucid, and what you're going to see is very similar flights, very similar fades. This one goes a little bit farther. Again, very similar flights, very similar fades. This one's a little bit farther. So, if you liked pre-Sweden Escapes, you're going to want to test this, at least one. They come out November 17th. Go grab yourself one, test it, maybe grab a couple just in case. And also be watching, because while the Supreme Escape is right here, the Supreme Judge comes out in December. And if there's one other Supreme line disc I'm excited for besides the Judge, or the Escape, it'd be the Judge. Of course, I'm also excited for the Trespass and the Fugitive, but really, Judge and the Escape have been mainstays of my bag since they came out in 2012. So getting Supreme versions of them is pretty exciting. So, November 17th, go grab yourself a Supreme Escape. December 2022, watch for the Supreme Judge. As always, thanks for watching. Put those questions and comments below so I can get back to you, and we'll go to the footage. Bye. Starting with wing comparisons, both the first run and current run Lucid Escapes have a little more concave wing than the Supreme Escape, and just a little bit more height overall. That's going to be the biggest difference on those. Here is a forehand. This was the best of them that I filmed with this disc. It throws for me like an Escape, which is not my favorite forehand disc, but I actually got some pretty nice pulls out of it and was exciting. Here's what I think it does a lot better. This is about 300 feet to that cement post out there that you can see in the distance, and then at about 5 feet from it, so inside the bullseye. Here's a 75% fully pull. You can see it just about flipped up to flat. Fades right back to center, about 325. Here's an 85-90% throw with a little bit of intentional tip on it. And this is going to go out to about 360-ish. Now, let's start the comparisons. Here is a current Lucid run. I actually tilted the Supreme more than the current Lucid, but you're going to see that is one of my turnover discs. It's not super beat in, but that is just going to keep turning right out of the screen, whereas the Supreme, which came out of the screen, is now back in it, fading out at the end. So quite a bit of difference in stability between those two. Going to the KP Orbit, the Kona Orbit Escape was one of my surprise discs of the Proto test. But you can see here the Supreme just has a different amount of stability, whereas the KP flipped up to flat and just kept going straight. The Supreme started to fade, and they actually ended up about the same distance, even with that different flight. Here, with that flex, that little bit of flex on the backhand, you can see the KP orbit's just going to keep going right to the ground. Supreme is going to flatten out and come back to center again. So, the main comparison, which was really surprising and exciting for me, was this First Run Lucid Escape. These are, for me, my favorite runs of escapes, those pre-Swedens. And you can see, even though I tilted the First Run Lucid a little bit more, put it on a little more hyzer, those flights were very similar. Sorry for the camera work here. One of my kids ran into the stroller on their scooters. But you can see here on the flex backhand, both discs hold that beautiful S-curve, that beautiful helix flight before coming back to center with the Supreme just a little bit farther. Here's that hyzer shot I showed earlier going out to that cement post. Apologies for both discs going out of screen. They are going to come back in. You'll be able to see the fade, and I think the fade is the important part. Just look at that very sharp edge on the hyzer. You can see it's holding it beautifully. First run was about 15 feet, Supreme was about 5, so both of them are right there. And here's just an ace run. The green basket is kind of hard to see unless you're on a full screen, but if you watch where the Supreme is right now, you can see it flash right across in front of the chains. Both discs ended up really close. You can see here the Supreme did hit that tree in the center and kicked back toward the basket, but both of them again were in the circle. So, in conclusion, the Supreme Escape, First Run Escape, is a very exciting disc for me. I love pre-Sweden escapes, and this disc seems to fly like those, but maybe even with a little more distance to it. So if you love old run escapes, this might be a good one for you to test. It does come in the Supreme plastic, which means durability, next edge feel, and all that good stuff as well. As always, thanks for watching. Please feel free to like, share, or subscribe to the channel. See you soon.